Hello everyone, good evening. I'm Shreya Dhoundial. It's good to see you, but it's certainly not good to see the war return to the Middle East once again. After 24 days of peace, epic fury has made an epic comeback. US and Iran are back to launching missile strikes against each other, and President Trump is back to ranting against Iran. It is he who announced the demise of the ceasefire at a NATO summit in Ankara, and he did so in classic Trump style, calling the Iranians scums and cancer and liars, amongst other things. Listen in.
We attacked very powerfully last night. The very dangerous people from Iran, they're sick. There's something wrong with them. We said, go and do your funeral stuff. And instead of that, they start shooting rockets at ships yesterday. And so we hit them very hard last night, very hard. I would say 20 to 1, 20 times tougher. I don't like them, and they're evil people, and it's the denuclearization of Iran. And we're going to denuke it. We're not going to let them because they're crazy, and they can't have a nuclear weapon. And they don't know. I don't think they know what the hell they're doing, but they're bad people. They start shooting bombs, actually missiles at ships yesterday. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, a couple of others, and they don't know. I don't think they know what the hell they're doing, but they're bad people. I think they're incompetent, by the way, because if they were competent, they would have made a deal a long time ago. Like, how about 47 years ago? We took out their first set of leaders. We took out their second set of leaders. They want to take out the U.S. leader, me. I'm on every list. I saw things this morning. I'm on every single one of their lists. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. I'll speak to our negotiators. They want to negotiate. They're good people. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. But they have to come back to me. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them. They're liars. We make a deal. And if I make a deal with him, we have a deal. And he goes out, he talks. We make a deal. Everyone's agreed. No nuclear weapon. We make a deal. They go outside, talk to the press. They say, we never even talked about it. There's something wrong with them. They're cuckoo. As far as I'm concerned, it's over.
Trump's fire and fury has come after Iran and the US traded strikes overnight. Epic Fury Part 2 was triggered after 3 tankers came under attack in the Strait of Hormuz on Monday and then on Tuesday again. Iran hasn't claimed responsibility for the attacks, but haven't denied the charge either. In retaliation, and let's just put those pictures out, yes, those ones. In retaliation, the US struck 80 Iranian targets and sunk 60 small boats belonging to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Then the IRGC announced they had targeted US military sites in Kuwait and Bahrain. And since then, things have spiraled. NATO, that much to Trump's irritation has not helped him with the war, today was supportive. With Trump watching, Mark Rutte, the NATO chief, said that the American strikes against Iran were absolutely necessary.
Well, I think it was absolutely necessary. Because when you have a ceasefire and Iran is basically violating the ceasefire, we see what happened yesterday with ships being attacked, I think it is totally crucial that the US forcefully reacts.
Both the American and the Iranians are accusing each other of violating the ceasefire. Iran's parliamentary speaker has accused the US of breaching the 14-page Memorandum of Understanding, saying that the US was violating Iranian adjustments in the Strait. I'm quoting him there. Ladies and gentlemen, security in the Gulf of Hormuz has been one of the most difficult issues to resolve in the US-Iran ceasefire talks. Both sides have differing interpretations of who should have access to it and how. Under this Memorandum of Understanding that was signed on 17th of June, Iran agreed to use its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days. That is, still the talks are happening. But it insisted that ships coordinate with Iran when passing through It had also warned that attempts to cross the strait along a route designated by the UN's International Maritime Organization, that's the IMO, were unacceptable and completely dangerous. Question is that why these 3 tankers were attacked on Monday and Tuesday by the Iranians? When the US and Iranian negotiators are still talking, what was the need for this provocation? By resuming Operation Epic Fury, has President Trump started a never-ending war? And very importantly for India, has India's energy security once again entered choppy waters? Before I go to my guest, there's some breaking news coming in. President Trump once again speaking sharply, escalating his rhetoric against Iran. He's saying that the US will hit Iranian targets very hard and very soon. He's saying, in fact, warning that more strikes could follow tonight. He is reiterating that Iran cannot be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon. Trump also describing the Iranian leadership as the bullies of the Middle East. He's using strong language to criticize Tehran once again, the second time, ladies and gentlemen, in the day today.
Probably hit him hard again tonight. I'll give him a little warning. We're going to hit him hard tonight. But we'll see how it all works out. No, I'm not happy with them.
My guest this evening, Adolfo Franco, is a Trump supporter. He's been a close aide. He's a Republican strategist joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Franco, thank you very much for your time here on Times Now. Raymond Vickery is a Senior Associate, Center for Strategic and International Studies, joining us on the broadcast as well. Thank you very much. Sushant Sareen is a Senior Fellow at the ORF, joining us on the broadcast. And Said Imamian is an Assistant Professor at the Tehran Polytechnic University, joining us on the broadcast. Also a co-founder of Governance and Policy, which is a think tank. Sushant, I'm coming to you first before I go to our guests who are joining us from out of India. Can you help me? I'm not looking for the Indian perspective right now, but according to you, can I ask you whether this was Iranian provocation that has led to Epic Fury resuming?
Look, technically, no. Because either the Americans should not have signed that document of surrender, which they call a Memorandum of Understanding, which is the single worst document I've ever seen anybody sign. They gave everything to the Iranians. They gave into all the Iranian demands. And then they tried to violate that particular MOU by forging a new path. And to some extent, you can argue that the Iranian position is that we will call the shots as far as the Strait of Hormuz is concerned. Now, that might not technically be correct position to take under international law, but international law no longer operates. There is some kind of a bilateral agreement. And to that extent, I think the Iranians are making their point that you cannot use these the straits without taking our clearance. Now, the problem, however, Shreya, is that having negotiated a terrible deal, the Americans want to play a fiddle with it, and that's not going to work out because the kind of exchanges we have seen. Number one, I don't think anybody in the world, I don't know about the people on this panel, but I don't think anybody takes Donald Trump seriously anymore. He comes out with one bizarre statement after another. Every day he's either issuing threats or he's heaping encomiums on somebody. The next day he's again hurling threats. So I don't know whether he actually wants to follow this through. But assuming he wants to follow it through, normally what we saw was in the past, if the Americans carried out an attack of the sorts they carried out last night, that had a salutary impact on the other side, and things would go back to normal. The Iranians, however, are not backing down. They are hitting back. And whatever the Americans are striking is not hitting the Iranian ability to strike back. And when they strike back, they can threaten the entire global economy by threatening the Arab states, their water supplies, their energy supplies, energy infrastructure. And yes, the Iranian infrastructure is just as vulnerable. And if it was to be struck, Iran can probably be bombed very significantly. But that means that you're sending the entire area, the entire region back into the story, or at least 100 years back. You don't have a solution to this particular crisis, no workable solution. And frankly, I think the Americans are out of ideas. They think that by browbeating the Iranians, they'll be able to get their way. But the Iranians are not backing down. So
Okay.
that's where you are at.
Okay, Adolfo Franco, would you want to respond to that? Essentially, the Americans are out of ideas, which is why we see the president's rant, which is why we see epic fury possibly resume again.
Well, first of all, with all due respect to the other guest, who I think is wrong, and frankly, your presentation here as well, you don't give the Iranian outrageous comments about President Trump, calling him a snake and a serpent and a criminal and death to America and death to Israel. So you should talk about the Iranian rants and threats, which you didn't on this program. Secondly, the guest has to understand this is not an agreement. It's a memorandum that was supposed to say the basis for negotiations. So it's not an agreement. But anybody who reads it on point 5, he glides over this gentleman, over this, international law. You don't have to get to international law. Obviously, it is an international waterway. But you don't have to get to international law to just read in plain English, if you can read plain English, that Iran doesn't have a right to, quote, make adjustments, charge tolls, or do what Iran has said in the last 2 or 3 weeks, that it owns the Strait of Hormuz and it controls it. There's nothing in that point number 5 of the memorandum that says you can't use southerly routes or international or Omani navigational waters. So this is completely made up in a violation by Iran. All of this has been, if you look at the scenarios from the beginning, have been reactions to Iran's actions. So every single violation has been met with an American response, every one of them, and has been an attack, cowardly attack on either civilians or commercial shipping. It's not been an attack on U.S. bases, and in fact, all of them have been provocations by Iran in violations of this understanding. It's not an agreement. It was supposed to be a basis to reach an agreement. So that is clear that Iran is not interested in doing this. It is, I agree with the gentleman, I'm not surprised by this at all. But President Trump has said repeatedly, I don't think it's erratic, with all due respect. He prefers a diplomatic solution. But he keeps saying, he will, like Teddy Roosevelt, a former president of the United States, who he recently honored, that he's going to carry a big stick as well. So it's up to Iran. This has all been Iranian driven. Iran has violated these agreements. We have responded. It's that simple. And he said one thing you did not carry on this program. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. But this matter will either be resolved militarily with much more firepower, not browbeating, but taking Iranian assets directly, including
Syed?
taking control of the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay, Mr. Franco, let me get in the Iranian view as well. Syed Imamian, the fact is, if you look at how things have played out over the last 48 hours or so, Iran will be accused of triggering 2.0, Epic Fury 2.0, simply because you are the ones who attacked those 3 shipping tankers, those 3 commercial tankers on Monday and Tuesday. Was there any immediate provocation? By the looks of it, no. But yet those 3 tankers come under attack. What did you expect the Americans to do if the tankers of the allies are getting attacked?
First of all, we need to understand to whom we are talking about. We are talking about the President Trump, who was the one who withdrew from JCPOA in 2018, who was the one who unprovokedly attacked Iran jointly by Israel once negotiations were going on 2 times in last year. So we are talking about the one who is fully untrustable, unreliable, and he's proud of his own unpredictability. So Iranians are not going to rely or trust on someone like him. They are just going to go through the text as the text it is. The text says that it is Iranian arrangement is going to be implemented during the 60 days of negotiation. So Iranian arrangements means the way and the mechanism that Iran is going to propose and to implement. Anything else is a kind of the violation of the point number 5 of the MOU. And if we are asking about what is the rationale behind such kind of the Iranian concern, is that Iranians are not going to allow any time again to Strait of the Hormuz as the Iranian geopolitical leverage to be used for military buildup against Iranian national security, and they are not going to allow anytime soon again to 168 Iranian schoolgirls to be killed by the brutality of the US and Israelis. So this is the Iranian right to protect their own national security and
But
to
Mr.
use
Imamian,
the
can I ask
leverage
you,
that they have.
Mr. Imamian, sorry to interrupt you here, but can I ask you, how does attacking 3 commercial tankers help your national security? These were commercial tankers. These were not American warships, right?
It's not about the commercial tankers or the commercial vessel. It's about another route that is not going to be under Iranian arrangement. That means once an alternative route would be open, there would be a route for military buildup. So this is the Iranian right to make sure that the MOU would be fully implemented based on the text and as it is. So anything else would be the violation of the 0.5, and Iran won't allow it,
Okay,
as far as I am understanding.
But my limited point is that those peace talks were still underway, right? There were 60 days for those peace talks. Some days have gone, and then there are some days still left. Where was the need to completely bombard that MOU and flush it down the Hormuz? But Sushant, do you see merit in what the Iranians are saying? That somehow the Americans were looking at a military buildup around the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran is in no mood to allow that.
No, I think that is clearly the Iranian position. I think they are asserting their control over the Strait of Hormuz. And the American negotiators should have thought this thing through. The American gentleman who was speaking after me, he's quoting Article 5. I'll just read the first 2 sentences, which are the operative part of what he's saying. Upon signing of this MOU, the Islamic Republic will make arrangements, Islamic Republic will make arrangements, using its best efforts for safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only. So the 60-day period, they're not charging anything, but they're saying these are our arrangements. You follow our arrangement. You can't go through a separate court. I'm not saying that their position is correct in international law. No, not at all. But this is the deal which the Americans signed with the Iranians. Now, you call it a deal, you call it a memorandum of understanding, you call it a surrender document, you call it what you want to call it. But it was a very, very badly negotiated deal. This is a typical real estate magnate saying, okay, fine, I'll use brute force later on, but let me get something out of the way. This is a horrible deal which was negotiated, and only the Americans and Trump's cult is saying that this was an excellent deal. Otherwise, everybody can see this is a surrender deal. You have given everything which the Iranians wanted, and kudos to the Iranians for getting everything which they wanted out of the Americans, and the Americans have been left holding the can. Now they're trying to retrieve the position, and clearly, as far as the MOU goes, I think the Iranians have a valid point. I might not agree with the position they are taking on freedom of navigation. It affects the rest of the world. But they are willing to go to that length where the Americans do not know what to do next, because the Iranians are not backing down. And Shreya, to your question, why are they asserting themselves? Why will they not? Because if they don't do it right now, it becomes a precedent and they lose out on whatever leverages they have gained over this period. So they are going to assert themselves. Why will they not assert themselves? They're not namby-pamby. They're not like the Americans. They are not ready to. They negotiated every single word, every single clause carefully. The Americans just went and, in an imperious style, signed off and said, okay, fine, we've got a deal. Well, now suffer the consequences of whatever deal you have signed.
Adolfo Franco, I'll let you respond to Sushant.
Thank you. Let me say this. I have the text here as well. It says safely passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Safely doesn't mean you hit commercial ships, as you asked. But more importantly, I don't read it that way. I read it as a way to make arrangements. There's no ceding in that clause that the Iran, as their government has now said, owns the Strait of Hormuz and controls it. Those are the words of the parliamentary speaker. They own it. Not only putting international law aside, which we all recognize that Iran has no right over it, The spirit of this, which is subject to dispute now because it's a very small document, was that they would make arrangements to make sure that there would be shipping that would go through safely and make those arrangements. Not ceding control, not deciding what routes. Where does it say in there that Iran decides what routes are going to be taken, northerly or southerly? There is nothing in that paragraph that makes any reference to that other than make best efforts to have the safe passage of ships. So that's the first point on this. I will say this to the guest, to be fair, because I'm not here just to argue for the sake of argument. Many conservative Republicans, myself included, who support President Trump, agree that the way the document was written, I would have written it differently and counseled against it. I concede that point. But I also have to recognize that that point has been taken to an extreme. The other guest has said from Iran that they're not going to let the commercial routes open and they're going to continue to do this leverage. That wasn't the spirit of number 5. The spirit of number 5, correctly or incorrectly, was the restoration of commercial travel or commercial activity to have oil leave the straits. That was the idea. In exchange for that, which we've honored, we would lift the naval blockade. So both sides could use it commercially. This was not a military route or anything else. That is, to my friend here that just spoke, that was the spirit. Whether that should have been more explicit, that's a fair criticism. But the spirit was the free commercial travel through the Strait of Hormuz as it was on February 28th. And in exchange, Iran would be able to itself export oil, which we have stopped through our naval blockade.
Correct.
We also had relief provided to Iran on the waiver of the sale of oil. So we honored our commitments. Iran has honored none of it. The guest in Iran has correct. They're using this as leverage. They're ignoring number 5. And their next step is going to say, I would venture even today, again, repeat that they own the straits. Is that what our Arab allies think? I don't think so. So they are provoking another war.
Okay. Raymond Vickery, as another voice from the United States of America, we are at a position where President Trump has just declared that you could see harder strikes against Iran possibly tonight. I want to ask you whether this is the starting of yet another never-ending war, that this is how it's going to play out. There'll be war, and then there will be some peace, and then there will be war again, and then there will be some peace. That this is going to stretch on for a very, very, very long time.
Well, thanks for having me. It seems to me that you've put your finger exactly on the problem. You know, when President Trump ran for office, he was against forever wars. And one of his key points was to bring home troops, to not be interfering all the way around the world. Instead, he's gone back on that. He didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize, and so I guess he decided he would get a prize for war. You know, in order to be able to wage war or peace, and you should have peace as the ultimate, peace with justice as the ultimate goal here, you have to have some strategy. You have to have partners, and you have to have principles. Unfortunately, President Trump had none of these in attacking Iran. He listened only to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he thought that he could bomb Iran into submission. This was entirely antithetical to anything which the United States should have learned from Afghanistan, Iraq, going back to Vietnam. He did not learn any of that. And now he's caught between a rock and a hard place domestically, because the midterms are coming up, and this war is extremely unpopular. And he is going down to defeat there. And so instead of trying to do something which is principled, he's doubling down on his my way or the highway approach. The unfortunate the unfortunate thing now is that the basic principle of freedom of the seas and maritime transit is at stake. It cannot be the case that Iran is allowed to own the Straits of Hormuz. This is antithetical to the interest of India and in the world, and it has wider implications, whether they be in the Straits of Malacca, the South Chinese Seas, the Bering Sea, in regard to the Red Sea. And so it is time for saner heads around the world in great democracies like India, in Western Europe, Japan, Australia, and so forth, to join together to try to impose what should have happened in the first place, and that is some strategy to get to peace. And that means adoption of principles and stepping back from what is going on now, which is just a resort to the use of force. That's not going to work. It hasn't worked in the past, and it's not going to work now. Unfortunately, that's the situation we find ourselves in, and it's up to saner heads around the world to rein in this disastrous approach of President Trump to international relations.
Okay. Saeed Imamian, can I just get you in here? Because there is a conspiracy theory that is asking, look, the fact is the MOU was signed some 24 days ago, and yet the Iranians waited for, till the time the Ayatollah's funeral got done to actually launch these strikes on these 3 ships. If there was any sort of violation by these 3 ships and you felt that the Americans were attempting a military buildup, you were seeing this for the last 15 days, 18 days, possibly 20 days, yet you waited for the funeral to get over before you resume the strike. So the conspiracy theory is you really were never interested in that memorandum of understanding or any sort of truce.
So for you, your information, the funeral is not over yet. Now the 3 Iraqi cities are hosting the body of the Iranian supreme leader that was brutally assassinated by a clear act of the state terrorism by Israelis and American joint operation. The funeral would be over in next 2 days, not now. But Iranians have been clear that the Strait of the Hormuz won't go back to the pre-war order. So that means that the full implementation of the MOU, based on the very clear understanding of the Iranian arrangement, needs to be materialized, and Iranians won't allow to this phrase, the point 5 of the MOU, to be violated. We need to know that before that point, even the first point of MOU needs to be fully implemented. That has been violated since day one. It is the ceasefire and withdrawal from the Lebanon. So U.S. Needs to prove its commitment to MOU. Otherwise, it is the Iranians' right, and particularly you need to understand how political pressure, how very heavy political pressure is on the shoulder of the Iranian negotiators, because millions of the Iranians are chanting in the streets in last few days during the funeral at least, that they are not going to trust on President Trump, and they are looking for a revenge for assassination of their supreme leader. So this is the political situation that we are living in Iran, and everyone needs to understand that Iranian needs to be very fully committed to the every point of the MOU, rather than having some concession and having some allowing some alternative routes to be established.
Okay, but Mr. Imamian, if the Iranians are looking at revenge for the killing of the Ayatollah, and the revenge, of course, is against President Trump and the Americans, then no one seriously was ever interested in any truce or any peace. But can I just ask you very quickly before I go to Sushant, how you react to the tirade that Mr. Trump has made against the Iranians? He's calling them scums, he's calling them liars, he's calling them cheats, he's calling them sick, he's calling them cancer. Would you want to respond to him?
I am an academic. I am not a politician. I am not as rude as President Trump is. So I'm going to keep polite, as Iranian civilization has learned me not to be someone like President Trump. But you know that the President Trump is the most unpredictable, the most hawkish, the most populist president that even U.S. has experienced. But it is not our problem. It is the American problem that his policy has been hijacked several times by Israelis, and he has been following Israel first policies rather than U.S. first policy. And we are thinking, if President Trump is genuinely looking for American interest, he needs to come to kind of the agreement and to be committed to that agreement, not the way that he has experienced. He has provided such experience of several times betrayal to diplomacy and withdrawal from very clear agreement that has been based between Iran and U.S.
To be fair to President Trump, he had warned when the MOU was signed that if the Iranians misbehave, I'm going to bomb their heads. So, Sareen, I'm tempted to ask you how this ends, but I think all of us know that this is not ending anytime soon. And what is going to play out is going to be extremely messy. But since our Iranian speaker has spoken about Israel, is it interesting for you or not that Israel so far has kept quiet? For the last 48 hours, Israel has been quiet as far as President Trump's rants are concerned.
No, I think that's the smart thing that the Israelis are doing. There's no point for them to say something and spoil the relationship with the United States more than what Mr. Trump has already tried to do. And I think the Israeli calculation is that this memorandum of understanding is going to collapse sooner rather than later because of the contradictions it contains. Look, let me give you a couple of examples. The very first article of it is that you will not use threats of force, right? How many times has Donald Trump violated that particular clause of the Memorandum of Understanding? Secondly, you negotiated a bad contract. Now, this is why you take experienced negotiators who will then say that forget about the spirit of the under which you are signing a particular thing. You might have one spirit, the other guy has some other spirit. You concentrate and you focus on the letter of whatever agreement or whatever deal you are signing. And clearly, on the American side, they committed a boo-boo on that. Number three, and Shreya, this is extremely important because it takes off from where Mr. Vikri left off. You know, look, use of force is terrible. Should not be done. But unsuccessful use of force is disastrous. And what the Americans did was unsuccessful use of force because they were not able to get what they wanted to do using force. And they still cannot. They know it. And the Iranians know it, which is why the Iranians are not going to back down. And let's not talk about international law anymore, much as it is in our interest that there should be freedom of navigation, that things like the Strait of Hormuz and all should be an international waterway. Nobody should have a veto on it. But having said that, what the Americans did in Venezuela, how was that in conformity with international law? What they have done in many other places, how is that in conformity with international law? International law cannot be invoked when it's convenient to you and then completely thrown into the toilet when it's not convenient to you. So let's not talk about international law. Let's talk about a bad deal which has been signed. The Iranians are smart. They are pushing the envelope. The Americans are in a bind. They don't know how far they can or cannot go. They hope the threats will work, but they clearly are not working. When they fire something at the Iranians fire back. And maybe this will not escalate into a full-blown conflict, which would be disastrous. But I would imagine that, it will continue with these fits and starts, and suddenly somebody will come in and say, okay, fine, you guys go back to talks. Some kind of a, understanding will be worked out until the next time it is violated. I suppose we are in that uncertain time right now.
We are in uncertain waters right now. We'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you to all my guests for joining us this evening. Adolfo Franco, thank you very much for being with us. Sushant, thank you. Raymond Vikri, thank you very much for your time. And also thank you to our Iranian guest, Syed Imamian. Thank you very much. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, a quick break. There's much more on the other side. Do stay with us.